Thank you, Mr. President. I rise tonight as we continue work on this defense appropriations bill to talk about the challenge we face in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Just to share some thoughts tonight, which I know are consistent with a lot of the concerns that have been expressed over the last couple of days and really weeks and months about the policy going forward. We confront as a country, when it comes to both the strategy going forward with Afghanistan and Pakistan, as we do in any conflict with any threat, we face the grave question of war and what will happen to our military strategy, what we will ask of our troops, what we will ask of the American people, both in terms of our blood and treasure, as well as what is the strategy going forward. So I think when we confront the grave question of war, we have to get it right. I believe the stakes are higher with regard to Afghanistan and Pakistan than they were even in the conflict that we waged in Iraq. I believe the stakes are higher for our national security. So we have no choice but to get it right. And when I say we, I think there's a lot of discussion and debate and focus on the President Obama and his administration. And that's appropriate because he's the commander-in-chief. But there's probably not enough discussion about what the Congress is going to do, what the Congress should do or not do, and in this case, what the United States Senate should do or should not do. So I think we'd be better off spending our time focusing on a substantive and thorough debate here in the Senate rather than just pointing a finger at the President's administration saying they have to do this or the President must do this. It's important when we talk about getting this policy right that the United States Senate gets it right, that the United States Senate puts the time in to debate and discuss these critical issues. And there's a lot to do in a rather short amount of time. I believe the President should be given a reasonable amount of time to review this policy. As we know, he set forth a strategy this past spring in March for our policy with regard to both Afghanistan and Pakistan. And if you remember how he articulated the mission, he talked about defeating al-Qaeda, disabling and dismantling and defeating al-Qaeda. And he talked a lot in his remarks about Pakistan and what would happen with regard to our strategy in Pakistan. But I believe there has not been to date in the United States Senate anything approaching a full and robust and thorough and substantive debate about what we're going to do going forward in Afghanistan or Pakistan. And I hope that people on both sides of the aisle, when we begin this debate, we've done some of it, we need to do a lot more, that we don't just dust off talking points from the war in Iraq, that we don't just dust off or employ sound bites. There's a time and a place to use sound bites in discussions and debates. But if we're going to get this policy right, it's not going to be a Democratic solution or strategy only, and it's not going to be a Republican solution or strategy only. We have to get it right, and that means we got to do a lot better than we did when it came to the debate before and during the war in Iraq, which is still a conflict that is ongoing, even as we draw down our troops. So we have to have a much better debate in the Senate on Afghanistan and Pakistan than took place here with regard to Iraq. And that's an understatement. And sound bites won't do it. Political rhetoric and political positioning won't do it, because that's not a full debate. In short, what we have to do, the administration has to do this, but we have to do this as well. In the United States Senate, we have to get the strategy right and debate the strategy before we have a long debate about resources. Okay? And that's critically important. And I know there are a lot of people in Washington who want to focus on one or two issues and make it simple and make it you're for or against this or that. We got a long way to go, and we have not had a debate about the strategy. We've had a lot of discussion and coverage of resources, be they troops or other resources, military or non-military. But we have not had a discussion and a debate here about the strategy. So we have to do that first, strategy before resources. Now, I had the opportunity, as many of our colleagues did in the summer, in August, to go to both Afghanistan and Pakistan for a limited period of time, but even in a short amount of time, you can learn a lot. 2 days in Afghanistan, 1 day in Pakistan. One of the highlights of my visit to Afghanistan, after having been in both countries in May of 2008, was the briefing that we got from General McChrystal. A tremendous overview, a thorough overview of what's happening on the ground, the threat to our national security as he sees it. Also a review not just of the military strategy and the military challenges, but the non-military as well. Sitting at the same table with General McChrystal were distinguished Americans who were serving us in non-military capacities, the Department of State, USAID, the Department of Agriculture, all kinds of help from various federal government agencies that involve the other part of counterinsurgency. It's not just a military campaign. Obviously, we have to do more than that. And General McChrystal, like many of his predecessors, is doing everything he can to get this right. And I, like others, have reviewed his classified report. We've heard him give a summary of the strategy, and it's very important that we weigh those considerations and weigh that assessment very seriously going forward. But General McChrystal's report is one of the things we have to weigh. We have to weigh a lot of other things as well. We've got to listen to experts within our government and outside of our government, experts within the administration, experts here in the Congress. The United States Senate is made up of so many senators who have long records on foreign policy as well as national security and making sure that we get this right. Some are Democrats, some are Republicans, and some are independents. And I will draw upon, as we all should, that experience, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But one thing that was stressed by General McChrystal and has been stressed, I believe, by President Obama and the administration, and should be stressed by us, is this policy, this strategy going forward in Afghanistan has to involve a couple of basic elements. It obviously has to involve and be focused on security. That's essential, obviously. But in addition to security and the military challenge, we also have to be concerned about governance. And we're concerned about the results of the election. We're concerned about whether President Karzai is doing what he needs to do to govern his country, to have a strong judiciary, to deliver services to his people, to make sure that the people of Afghanistan have confidence in his leadership. So we have to be concerned about security and governance, but also, thirdly, development. What's going to happen on the ground? A lot of people working as part of provisional reconstruction teams, so-called PRTs, who are doing great work on the ground. It's not in the newspaper very often. It's not heralded like a battle is or like a controversy might be. But that's part of building up communities throughout the country in Afghanistan so people can take control of their own lives, take control of their own communities, and take control of their own security and thereby their own future. We also had a chance to talk at length about what's happening in Pakistan and the threats that come across the border from Pakistan into Afghanistan, threats that involve al-Qaeda or other extremist or insurgent groups that have some loose confederation with or connection to al-Qaeda and threaten our national security, threaten the security of the Afghan people, and even threaten the security of the Pakistani government. These are very difficult challenges we face, and they do involve, I believe, our national security. But we have to get it right with regard to what we do in Afghanistan as well as in Pakistan. I mentioned before there are a number of senators here in this chamber in both parties who have been trying to begin and amplify this debate. I happen to be a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Our chairman, Senator Kerry, has had a number of hearings on various aspects of this policy, not just going back the last 2 or 3 weeks, but going back months. And that informs this debate. And Chairman Kerry has shown great leadership on these issues, as well as broader national security issues. Chairman Levin, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, gave a speech, floor speech recently, which laid out a thoughtful approach. He talked about building up the Afghan army and the national police prior to a serious consideration of additional troops. And he wants to accelerate, as we all do, the building up of the army and the police in Afghanistan, and maybe in a much shorter time frame. That's critically important. We've got to spend a lot more time talking about and debating and informing ourselves about how best to accelerate the training of the Afghan army and police. Chairman Levin, as well, has shown through his leadership of the Armed Services Committee how important these issues are. And on the other side of the aisle, I read a Wall Street Journal piece recently by John McCain, the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, Senator Lindsey Graham, and Senator Joe Lieberman. We have to consider those points of view in that, not just in that op-ed, but in other discussions and debates here on the floor. As I said before, there's not going to be one party that's going to solve this. There's not going to be one party to implement a counterinsurgency strategy, because when it comes to war and when it comes to the non-military challenges we have that are connected to a war or a campaign, there's not a Democratic or Republican way to fight a war. There's only an American way. And we need American solutions. We need a kind of consensus that we may not need on some other issues. But on this one, to get it right, we're going to need both parties, and we're going to need the support of the American people to get it right. And finally, let me just say one more word about why we're doing this, why we should have a thorough debate going forward, why it's important we spend a lot of hours here, not just on the floor, but in hearings and discussions and briefings with various experts that come before us, and to thoroughly question and ask the tough questions of the administration. I was glad that we voted today a list of administration officials that we want to come before the United States Senate after the President makes fundamental determinations about this policy. Once he has made his decision, then we should have a whole series of hearings where we can cross-examine not only General McChrystal and the underpinnings of his policy, but so many others in the administration. A very strong administration, I would argue, on foreign policy and national security. I won't go through all the names tonight that would give evidence to that. But finally, let me say this. If we're going to get this right, for the fighting men and women that we send out onto a battlefield, if we're going to get this right for the taxpayers who are going to be financing this effort, whether it's military or non-military, we do have to get it right. And one thing we have to bear in mind is when we send troops out to fight a battle, we have to make sure that the policy that undergirds their fight, that the strategy that leads to a discussion about what the resources are to give them all the resources they need to fight a battle, whether it's very wide or very narrow in focus. Whatever it is, we have to make sure that what we do here is worthy of their sacrifice, that what we do in the United States Senate on strategy or policy is worthy of what we're asking them to do on the battlefield. And we haven't done that yet. We haven't done that yet, and we're a long way from doing it. So I hope in the next couple of weeks, even as the President is asking tough questions and making determinations about a policy, that we do our job in the United States Senate to ask those tough questions, to have that important debate, and make sure it's substantive and not political, and make sure it's about strategy and not just the politics or the sound bites of the moment. So to be worthy of their valor, those fighting men and women, and to be worthy of their sacrifice, we've got to do our job here in the United States Senate, and that has not happened yet, and we've got to make sure we do that in short order.